So Bushiroad announced that we are getting a new ban list on the 30th of December for the English metagame this time. So I figured we'd go over my predictions, what can we expect, what do we think will get hit or slaughtered on the ban list. As always, if you still need any beautiful playmats, go to zerodamagegaming.com, use the code Solemn, link will be in the description. Some of our mats from back in the day are gonna be vanishing again, so don't forget to use the code Solemn. If you still need to pre-order any cards, go to 50cards.shop and use the code Solemn. And if you want to hone your Vanguard skills, get Vanguard Mastery, also using the code Solemn. So now for the ban list prediction, of course we have 3 formats, so we're just gonna be talking about what we can expect to happen. For standard, I think it's pretty simple. I think we're gonna have just an exact copy of the one we had in Japan, if that. It's possible we don't even get that because we still have to wait a little bit for the coming sets, but overall standard seems fine. We also just had, those new promos for Eva that have been putting in work for Eva, so like the older results where maybe Gravidia was too strong, some could argue, aren't even that relevant anymore. So we have some fresh new decks starting to do well. We also just had Youth added in set 7, at least, with Tempest and Wayward and all the good support coming from that set. And on top of that, next year, or well, basically in a few days, the new year is gonna start. Then we're also gonna start getting some new cards. We're gonna have like the Regalia set with Lukier, gonna get the Chrono Jet Stride deck set. So a lot of stuff is gonna change for standard, and so I don't see them doing any hits when everything is pretty alright overall anyway. So again, if they're gonna do anything, it'll be probably the unhits that Japan also did. Now for V, I think it's pretty obvious what needs to happen. I think Steam Maiden has run its course. I know it's a bit quick because they technically only got their clan collection in this summer, and now they've had, one season of fun, but it's time for them to hit. Now the issue is, how hard do you need to hit? Because that's like a really important thing to consider. It's not quite as easy as you might think. You have essentially 2 camps. You have the people who say, okay, Antarana is the reason this clan is now ridiculous, right? Like before Antarana, they already had Elul, the grade 3. They already had Colossus. So technically, you could already do all of the things that make the scary turns. However, what they didn't have was Antarana with the Gear Cat, making it like the easiest +3 on their turn 2 ever, maybe even more if they saw multiples. And so it's that ridiculous consistency and plussing engine, let's say, that is really what caused all the issues. So you could argue we either hit that, because, well, that's when the issue started and it's a hard +3, or we hit Colossus because that card is what pushes the deck over the edge when it comes to power, If you get rid of just Colossus, you still have unfair plussing with Antarana and Gear Cat. It's just that you no longer have these ridiculously unguardable turns. Right now, if Steam Maiden rides up and you are at 5, it's probably over. If they re-ride and you're at 5, it is over. There is nothing you're gonna be doing against that double force marker stacking, the whole shenanigans with, ping pong in between the markers, and then you have to guard with 2 on every single attack. That's what pushes it really over the edge. So you're basically asking yourself the question, do you kill Steam Maiden by getting rid of Antarana, and then it just becomes a tier 2 or 3 deck, or you kill Colossus, and then Steam Maiden is arguably still one of the best decks. Like, be very aware of this. If Colossus gets hit, Steam Maiden will still be like tier 1. But do you care about that? That is basically up for debate. We have Worlds coming up, and it seems this ban list is specifically for Worlds, because for Wise, for example, it said the effective date was the 27th of January. So it's basically like, this is gonna define Worlds format, and then probably Springfest is still gonna follow the same ban list, so probably Springfest as well, unless we see some kind of wacko thing happen in Worlds where it's like, damn, we need to emergency hit this or something like that. So definitely something in Steve Maiden needs to be hit. But if you nuke it, then the format is pretty wide open. Then we basically go back to the previous format. Blue Art is probably gonna be quite a bit better than the previous format. You also no longer have Prism. Leopold got a big buff in Clan Collection. So we'd be looking at previous format plus Clan Collection minus Steam Maiden. Personally, I'm fine with either. I think that both options are okay as long as something happens, though I do understand why some people just want Antarana gone as a whole. I think what they will do is hitting Colossus, because it is the most obvious one, and it also doesn't kill the Clan Collection product when it comes to Gear Chronicle fans. But let me know what you want to be happening in the comments down below. So for Premium, we could of course discuss a lot of things again. First of all, ban over triggers. This should also be banned in Standard. Over triggers suck, blah blah blah. It's always the same thing, As long as Bushiroad doesn't hit these, it's just a problem for the game. Now for Clan specific, specific hits. The first and obvious one is probably some hit in Narukami. We saw in the last 2 formats, even though it was 1 season, we really had 2 different formats. We had the MFD Ripple format, and then we had what we have right now. Naru was really good in both. You know, in the MFD Ripple format, Naru just countered both hard, whereas in the format afterwards, it's just one of the most consistent decks. You know, it has a solid Steam Maiden matchup, it does pretty well into NLK, it can hold its own against Grand Blue, it can beat Highlander and so forth. You know, DP is kind of a weaker matchup for it, Regalia is an awful matchup for it, but those are more, you know, rogue-ish than the real main meta. So overall, Naru is just a solid pick into everything. It isn't unfair per se, but it's really consistent and really solid. And of course, it also had like the highest amount of tops when you put those 2 seasons together. Now, of course, if you had only the second part of the season, let's say maybe Naru's results weren't as insane anymore, but still, when Bushiroad looks at the data, they go like, look at these pie charts, Naru is still the #1 right now. And Naru has been, you know, talked about for a long time because Stunverse, you know, Stunverse has always been a very controversial card, a very unfun to play against type of card. And so it is very possible that the way they approach this is, look, Naru has these insane amounts of tops, maybe it's time to do something about it. Once again, there are multiple ways to address this deck. If you look at the deck right now, it is usually Eradicators that's doing well. There's like 1, 2, 3, 4 Vanquisher tops, probably less, probably like 3. I want to say 3 Vanquisher tops or so. That's not that many. So it's mostly Eradicator. And within Eradicator, we see 2 types of mindsets. We see the ones with Sweep Command that are basically looking to spam Exterminate, the new Premium Collection Stride. And then we have the Vowing Sword ones, or Vowing Saber ones, that are looking to spam the Stunverse. Now, both of them are usually also just ran together. So people will be running and Sweep Command and Vowing, and then basically using, you know, whatever stride they need for a given matchup. Overall, I find that spamming Stunverse is often just better. I know there was like this running thing where people were saying Stunverse is overrated, Exterminate is so much better, blah blah blah, but in the end, the only reason Exterminate was like really good was because people were trying to play around Stunverse, so these fronts were like more empty more often than not. And beyond that, whenever Exterminate is bad, Stunverse is really insane. Like, Stunverse also just has this automatic scaling where you do a Stunverse and the first one is kind of mid, but then the second one is unfair as hell, probably auto wins you the game, and then if there's a third one, you know, the third one really auto wins you the game. Now, some will say, oh, but premium, you know, usually by second stride it should be over anyway. That's kind of true, but the thing is that that is only true because you are trying to keep up tempo on your side of the table into that second stride. Like, no one is damage denying super hard right now because the best decks aren't able to load damage into 6 quite as easily anymore. However, Naru can. So Naru can actually play a very control-y, stallish game and then auto-win on a Stunverse in a way that other decks really can't. Like, if Grand Blue wants to kill second stride in the current builds, it usually can't do that from 1 or 2 damage, whereas Naru can, if they want to, you know, just play a passive game, not call too many rear guards, keep a giant hand, and they know, well, if I reach second Stunverse, it's over anyway. It doesn't matter how hard I push. So while I understand, you know, second stride, you auto win anyway, it's not quite correct when you also look at how tempo-wise games are played out. So you could argue both ways. You can either say we choice restrict Exterminate with Stunverse, and this way people basically are forced into one or the other, and so you can play around it. The issue is when you sit in front of a Naru player, you don't necessarily know what they're going to be playing right. Now, against Vanquisher, you know, because you know they can only be spamming Stunverse, but into Erads, this might be an Exterm type deck or a Stunverse type deck, and if you gamble wrong, you might auto lose because of it. So like, from a play perspective, the choice restrict is pretty awful, though it is relatively fair, you know, in terms of restrictions. Another option is banning Stunverse, and then the final option is banning Exterminate. Now, Vowing, of course, is so crazy that I think if you just ban Exterm, Naru is probably still one of the best decks purely by spamming Stunverse. Exterm is solid, it's like a decent stride, but it's nowhere near the reason Naru is doing so well. So I feel that banning Stunverse is probably better than banning Exterm. The only thing that sucks about banning Stunverse is that it ruins Vanquisher, whereas banning Exterm doesn't ruin Vanquisher. But on the other hand, if you're currently a Naru fan, don't you just want to play with new cards? Like, aren't you tired of spamming Stunverse? I think if you want to keep Naru players happiest, you just choice restrict it. I think if you want to keep most players happiest, you ban Stunverse. Sunverse, and I think if you want to keep Vanquisher players happiest, you ban Exterminate. Regardless though, let me know your thoughts on this one in the comments down below. Now for other clans, there are definitely some options that can be addressed. Steam Maiden is a very solid deck right now, so it's possible you want to see some hit there. Maybe Entarana is really so broken that you just need to ban it forever in every format because +3 is just too good. Or maybe you consider Colossus just ridiculous regardless. Like maybe your issue is really that turn-wide guard restricts on a rear guard aren't future-proof. And this is something I've talked about in previous videos even. Maybe even last banlist video was like, guys, maybe we need to watch out with those turn-wide guard restricts. Essentially, here's the thinking. If you have a rear guard that says for the rest of the turn, your opponent needs to guard in a certain way, this means this rear guard will have that effect on the turn regardless of every single future card that comes out. This means your boss that you are on can be wildly different and that turn-wide guard restrict will still be active. So as those bosses, whether it's a Stride or a grade 3 from V, gets better and better and better, those guard restricts on top of that also get better and better and better. For this reason, I think cards like Colossus, Hope on Damp, Variance Hardleg, any card that just says when placed, rest of turn, hapti-dapti-da, probably should be dealt with. It doesn't kill any specific decks. All it does is ensure that we don't have future-proof issues. So Steam Maiden could probably be fixed by just banning Colossus. In the same vein, some people talk about DI. Now, DI, I don't think is that great. Could it win Worlds? Sure. You know, can it win in general? Sure. But it is a very sacky deck. It needs a lot of things to go right every single round for it to actually be good. On the other hand, when everything goes exactly right, it is absolutely unfair, especially because of turn-wide guard restricts. So once again, if you just ban Hope on Damp, ban Variance Hardleg and so forth, I think you fixed most of the issue. Another example of this is the Coral guard restrict. And once again, I know this sounds crazy. I mean, why do you care about Coral? No one's stopping with Coral, but this is another one of those, like, I place it and for the rest of the turn people have to guard this way, and that is just a problem waiting to happen. It is entirely possible that one day we see a crazy bullshit attack combo with a new Stride that breaks because of that Coral card. So yeah, turn-wide guard restricts are probably something to be looking at then next, but specifically turn-wide guard restricts that aren't printed on a Stride. And the reason that we want to keep that different, in my opinion, is because the ones that are printed on Strides usually at least force you to stride into that, meaning you can't really benefit from the power creep that went into bosses or new Strides. So for example, if a new Shadow Paladin Vanguard comes out, whether it's a Stride or a V card, you can't use Morfessa's turn-wide guard restrict with that. So it's not really gonna break the game quite as easily. A similar thing for Ichikishima, similar thing for Bartholomew. I guess Chainranker and Crystalluster though do have the potential of breaking this way, because they do scale with future grade 3s. Now another thing you could hit is Highlander. You know, a lot of people do not like the fact that Katire can basically search anything. While it is also a relatively sacky deck, a lot of people talk about it's like, oh, draw Katire or die. That deck does seem pretty strong, so maybe you want to hit Katire in some way as well. Finally, and this might be a hot take, Nightmare Doll might still be up for debate. If you look at results from the last part of the season, Nightmare Doll actually has been converting into Worlds qualifications extremely well. So while it wasn't super played, because, you know, so many other decks were now super hyped and so forth, and a lot of people also got to play it already in Springfest, it was still topping a fair bit, and then once it topped, it also qualified Worlds very often. So while it has been under the radar, not played as well, there is functionally no difference between the Nightmare Doll that was dominating Springfest and the Nightmare Doll that is now being played barely in singles. So people who knew that and were playing with it actually had a very, very strong edge against other players. So, you know, despite the results right now not really looking oppressive, it is possible that once you start looking at all of the stuff we've been talking about, that you know, could be hit. Now, with that being said, I don't actually think Premium requires this many hits. Right now, the format's actually really good. I think in terms of Premium, in 2022, we have been quite blessed. Springfest was awesome, skill mattered a lot. This BCS season was awesome and skill mattered a lot, except for, you know, when MFD and Ripple were running amok, because those did have like a ridiculous high roll potential and so forth. So that was like a little bit of a bad blip, let's say. But beyond that, the whole year, Premium has been awesome. There have been loads of decks really good. Skill mattered a lot in a lot of these matchups. So overall, you know, if they did a tiny list or something like that, I wouldn't actually complain. You know, all of the things I was just talking about are just, you know, thoughts in my head, things I consider, oh, that could maybe be an improvement, you could look at that. Or if you start hitting a bunch of stuff, this might be next in line. I don't feel like, damn, this needs to be addressed or anything like that. I think, you know, just in terms of future proofing, you could hit the turn-wide guard restricts. If you feel, oh, I'm kind of sick of Naru being good, you know, you might hit one of those. I think the only thing that I really want to see is just OT out of standard and premium, but that's more like a general game thing rather than a specific deck thing. So in terms of ban lists, you know, putting it all together, I don't think anything in Vanguard desperately needs hits right now from the 3 formats except Steam Maiden. Like, you need to nuke the living shit out of Steam Maiden in V, or that format isn't playable. But the other two are in pretty good shape. It's just like, okay, some quality of life, we might do a little bit of tweaking or improvements, but overall, it's pretty solid. You know, I don't really have major complaints beyond Steam Maiden V. And I think the results also show that. If we just look at the past results for the past BCSs, everything looks quite alright. Just, you know, that one purple eyesore in V really needs a slap on the wrist. And with slap, I mean like an axe straight through. With that being said, that was everything. Let me know your thoughts on the lists in the comments down below. Is there any deck you think really needs some hits? Be sure to like, comment, subscribe. If you need any cards, go to 50cards.shop. If you need a beautiful new playmat, go to zerodamagegaming.com and use the code Solemn. And I will see you soon. Ciao.